Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Ben Rothke. Ben is a Senior Information Security Manager over at Experian. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Well, thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career thus far?
Oh, yeah. I've been in technology for about 20 years. About half of that, technology information security, about half of that has been in consulting professional services. The other half working internally in corporate security roles. And, that's what I'm doing now.
Very cool. How have you found the transition from consulting into the internal side?
I've done, back and forth with that. I like it. Each trajectory has its pluses and minuses. Consulting is great. You're able to see a lot of different types of organizations, different products, work with a lot of, different people. On the other side, you want to stay at one place, dig some, deep roots. And, so that's what I've been, doing the last 5 years or so internally.
Awesome. Yeah, and I've worked with a lot of consulting firms over the years. Haven't worked with quite as many internal teams, so would certainly be interested to get your thoughts on how hiring is different between consulting and the internal side. But I guess just to kind of start off, would you say that the talent gap is real? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
The talent gap is indeed real. The question is, how much of a gap is there? There's a lot of stories talking about millions of information security jobs, and that's preposterous from every way, shape, or form. If you take a few minutes on a napkin and do some math, it's going to come out that 1% of the U.S. population works in information security. With that, there is a shortage of information security pros. On the other side, it's not like, some years ago, a person could send their feelers out and they'll have, 50 people reaching out to them about a job. There's a lot more competition. The time to hire people is much more significant. Layoffs are a lot more vast and coming. Citi announced last week they're going to be laying off 20,000 people. So there is a gap, but it's not at the pandemic proportions they make it out to be. And that's sort of why some of these articles I've written is I've had people reach out to me saying, hey, I want to get into information security because I hear it's such an in-demand profession. Parents reach out to me. They're saying, hey, my kid's looking for career opportunities. What do you think of this? So there's a lot of hype out there. There's a huge amount of misinformation. Yeah, there is indeed a gap, but the gap is not that vast.
Yeah, and it's not at the entry level too, and people just don't know this. I've spoken at B-Sides, for instance, and I had people say, wow, I had no idea that there was this much competition at the entry level. I was always told that this is a growing field, X, Y, and Z number of people are needed in this field, and there's not enough people. So to hear you say that was a shock to the system, but also valuable. I think it is important to adjust expectations with these folks that are trying to break into the industry. And I think breaking into the industry is an apt term, but they're, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and they're super excited. And then, I hate to say it, but sometimes I feel like I have to crush somebody's dreams just to kind of adjust expectations a little bit. But I think if people go into this blind, if their expectations are way up here and the reality is way down here, the fall is even worse. Whereas if you adjust expectations a little bit, they're not going to be as disappointed when it takes them 6 months or 12 months or whatever to break into the field. I guess speaking in terms of like order of magnitude, do you have a sense for how many unfilled security jobs we have open right now compared to the millions that everybody heard?
The short answer is no. And because it's not really tracked that well. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, just looks at, cybersecurity analysts. So that adds to the, uncertainty because, no one knows how many openings there really are. Some of the job figures, get exacerbated because, people might go to the job boards and do a quick search on information security jobs. And they'll see a figure and, extrapolate off of that. Part of the problem is, and which, adds to the overall issue is HR practices. And so let's just say you go to Indeed and you find, 5,000 or 10,000 jobs in Chicago or Atlanta. Those are not 5,000 unique jobs. Many of those jobs are the same jobs regurgitated by various outsource firms, business process outsource organization, very large organizations. J.P. Morgan Chase may have one rec that is sent to 100 consulting firms, who in turn may work with 100 other consulting firms. So you have one job opening, which could conceivably present itself as 1,000 job openings. And that's why, and people play around with numbers like that. But I said is, you've got one opening. It's sort of like how airlines book seats. They will overbook. On any flight, you may have 3-4 people who get bounced from their seat. But imagine you're going to your flight and, it's a 737 with, 150 seats. And there's, 3,000 people showing up there. An airline wouldn't last long in that environment. And that's part of the issue is, how many jobs are out there? Impossible to tell. No one knows. And I said that just only makes makes things much more difficult.
For sure, yeah. And being somebody who spends the majority of my time on LinkedIn, I tend to favor LinkedIn to get some sort of idea of how many of these jobs actually exist. And I've been tracking it on and off since about September of last year. I think it was around October, November, I saw an all-time low. If you just use cybersecurity as the search term and search in the United States, as of October, it was like 5,000, which was the lowest I had ever seen. That was down from 15,000 a couple months prior. Now we're up to about 50,000 in the U.S. As of recording this January 15th of 2024. So at least anecdotally, it seems like there is an uptick in open security jobs. How many are there exactly? Like you said, I don't think we really know. We can provide our best guess, but I would say that anything entry level is going to be a small fraction of those 50,000 or however many are out there. You could extrapolate a little bit from that 50,000 on LinkedIn, add in other platforms, add in job titles that don't include cybersecurity, and maybe you're at 100,000 open jobs, something like that. But it's certainly not 3 million or whatever the number of the day is. And obviously, each discipline is going to have its own sort of supply and demand graph, too. Are there certain sub-disciplines of security that you kind of see there being a lack of talent for?
I think, cloud security engineers, those folks are in demand. People who understand secure coding, heavy engineering, network design, architecture. To your point earlier about entry-level security jobs, Helen Patton, a friend of mine, she works at Cisco. She wrote a book on information security careers. Anyone who's looking to get in security, that's one of a number of, really good books out there. They should read. She puts forward the notion that the idea of a entry level information security job is a misnomer, meaning it's not entry level. You really need a background in IT in a lot of different areas to do this thing called security, because security is a specialty. It's a subspecialty of information technology, and you can't do security, if you don't understand how IT works. I mean, you could train someone to do, changes on a firewall. But if they're just doing these, moves, add changes to the firewall rules, they're not adding a lot of value there. You want someone to see, hey, I got this change ticket come in, making this request. And, this is, even though it might have been approved, this might not be a good idea. We're opening the network to this vendor, which, we haven't had who is not approved. We're using these protocols, which may have security issues, et cetera. So just at a point where a person could be entry level per se. You need that IT experience, and that's lost in a lot of these people who think they could, get into the field quickly in 6 months or so. There's a lot of boot camps out there that try to, get people, 6 months to a high paying career. Even there's a lot of colleges who are, offering these programs. They're quite profitable for them, but in the end, they give them this training. They don't give them any help when it comes to finding a job. Someone reached out to me recently. They're completing a master's program at a prestigious university in New York City. And he said, they don't offer, any help with job placement. They had a job fair, but that's it. And this is a person who spent close to $50,000 on to get their master's in information security. So it's a complex, situation, a lot of variables out there. But it's important to understand is that, security is built on IT. And if you don't really understand IT, and there's a lot to IT, operating systems, networks, protocols, workstations, servers, configuration, all that and more, you can't be a good security pro if you don't understand, those cores. And I said is that once again, if you want to teach someone to do a very limited task, you can do that, but they're not going to advance. There's no career growth in that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like we have almost two camps when it comes to quote unquote entry level jobs in security. They're the folks that say, you can create an entry level security job. We need to break down the gates, allow more people in. And then those people would say, hey, this other camp that says security isn't an entry level field. They're gatekeepers. This is unnecessary. But the gatekeepers say, well, hey, we're securing important assets here. Somebody needs to understand what they're securing. So they have to have that foundation in IT. Do you think there is ever such thing as an entry-level security job? Maybe GRC or documenting policies and procedures, that sort of thing?
To a degree, perhaps, in limited scenarios, but like, you want a person to, be a good generalist and then, go into specific areas. And even, even with GRC, you want to teach someone, to be an auditor. That's why, many auditors get the, have a bad rep because, it's just about checking the box. Do you have encryption in place? Yes. Okay. Next question. What does encryption in place mean? Do you have proprietary encryption? How are keys managed? How are secrets managed? Let's go into the AWS console and look at the configuration. And so, as I said, security is very broad, but for a person to be good at that, you need to be much more than that. Than that person who's just checking the boxes, answering the questions. You need to know, even though they answer yes, say so. Tell me, how do you do you have a process to securely onboard and offboard employees? Yes. Well, so tell me about it. And in that narrative, as the auditor, you need to understand, is that a good process? Are they doing it right? Is it commensurate with their specific levels of risk? Not saying that, to be a security professional, you need to be like a neurosurgeon, 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 8-year residency and maybe a 2-year fellowship. But with that, it does take a lot of groundwork to get those basics. So you can, when the person says, yes, we have encryption, do you do log reviews? Yes. Tell me, how are you reviewing those logs? And so you really want to, in essence, it's that trust but verify and really understand it. So, in a limited sense, you can create some initial entry level job, and hopefully the person will go into that and grow from it. But at the macro level, you really can't substitute a good background in information technology as a precursor to going into information security. There always is one-offs, but in the big picture, at the macro level, as it is, there accept no substitutions.
Yeah, fair enough. So, what would you say then that we do with the folks that maybe went the academic route or the boot camp route, and they're facing that harsh reality right now. Hey, you really need to go get some IT experience first, and they're thinking, okay, well, I have all this student debt. I need to get some sort of well-paying job to pay my bills and pay off some of these loans. What do we do with these folks? Where do we direct them in the short term or how do we build a pipeline to get those folks eventually to the knowledge level that they need to be employable in security?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it is sad. I mean, in some ways, it's, people who spend massive amounts of money on Super Bowl tickets, and they show up to the gate and find, those tickets are not legit. So they spent a lot of money flying there, a lot of money on the tickets, a lot of money on the hotel. And the person says, you're not getting into the game. So for some of these people who, spent a lot of money, there is no real, option to give them in the short term. There are a lot of larger companies, some of the Fortune 500 are creating programs to help, give people in IT who are interested in security the ability to transition, into information security. For those who may not find themselves working at a Fortune 500 firm that has something like that. There's Coursera. There's a lot of courses they could take online to give them that training. It's hard to substitute a good background in IT. The good side is for people who do have an initiative. There's a lot they can do with a home lab. Buying there's so much open source software, especially in information security. Just tools that would have cost collectively $1 million 20 years ago, you could get for free. Kali Linux, for example. Hundreds of tools. If you would have bought those individually, in 1995, it really would have been $1 million worth of tools. I mean, Wireshark alone would have put you back $25,000 plus a $8,000 compact laptop. So there's a lot people can do at home on their own. A lot of online courses, but my experience in working with people is there is no substitute for a good IT background. As a way to get in, working as a help desk. It's a brutal job as a help desk. People are screaming at you. Obviously, the fact that they're calling you means, they have a problem, things aren't working. But it's a good way to learn technology. It can be a stepping stone. Some managed security service providers, SOC analysts, they will hire people with, little experience, and they have training programs to bring them in. That is one option, but really it comes down to, everything. It's nice that people have an interest in this field, but, to get to the point where a company is going to pay you money to do that, you need to come to the table and show them that, you have that experience. And that is always the problem, of entry-level jobs. You need that first job to get your foot in the door. Once you get in the door, it's much easier after that point. But, every aspect of IT, that first job is always the hardest. But, as I said, you don't need to be, the 12 years of educational experience to be a neurosurgeon doesn't work in security. But, you need to have that drive. You need to have that interest, a passion for it. But really, what I've seen where people are successful is you get that strong IT background experience, then transition into security. That works most of the time. There is, secondary ways to, get into security, but I think you focus, on the best way to get there. And people need to level set and see that these, a 5-month InfoSec boot camp really is not going to get you a job. And you go back to these firms and say, let me speak to people who've graduated your program and have found jobs. And, it's hard to find people to speak to because, at the end of the day, they don't have a lot of success.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think we could almost make the distinction between true entry-level jobs, which, it sounds like you would make the argument, not necessarily applicable for security. So there's the entry-level job, and then there's the junior job. I think we also have a lack of junior jobs. So, I do free career guidance calls with candidates that are looking for jobs. So many people that I talk to are currently help desk or sysadmins. They have a home lab. They know people in security. They're doing everything right by all measures, but they're still struggling to get in. They're still struggling to get that first, even junior security role, SOC analyst role, whatever you want to call it. And you mentioned something interesting about MSSPs. I'm in complete agreement. I think the onus is on MSSPs and consulting firms to have these training programs for folks where they can mentor them, because they know that they're going to get their money back on their investments of these folks, because they're going to be profit generating when they're working with clients. Any other thoughts how on the hiring side we can build more of these talent pipelines to open up more of these junior level roles in security?
It's I don't really have a good answer for you, because it is a solution really takes a long-term approach. And most companies now, budgets are so tight, is that, it's hard enough to get budget, to meet your current needs, but, to create a program where we can, where you could build a pipeline and hire people, 2 years down the road, very few companies will invest in that. I said, the Fortune, 500 are doing that because, they have the breadth of talent. They have the budgets to do that, but it's one of those. It's a problem that it's sort of kicked around. No one wants to own it because it is so big, and that once again that there's a lot of factors that add to the overall talent issue, and that's yet but another one. But to a degree, this is true in a lot of different industries. In aviation, there's pilot shortages. Some airlines have worked with flight schools, to create programs called to make it easier to transition into that. Try finding a pediatric dentist. That's an issue also. There's especially in the medical field. Finding an internal physician is not so easy. There's a great, the doctor I use, he's great. Someone was looking for a physician and I recommended, they call back, he says, well, he's got a 6-month waiting list. So I said, the shortage is pervasive. It's not just a security issue. It's overall. I said, there's a lot of shortages. There's a shortage of doctors in the country. And that's something, they're working on, but I said, it's a huge problem. Security, is much smaller than that, but it's something we're going to have to deal with for a few years. So let's figure it out. But I think it's important, people to understand, there's not millions of jobs out there. I said, it's a great profession. I love security. That's something important also. Anyone who goes into it, needs to understand, what it is, and you have to enjoy it. But if they do, there is a lot of opportunity. But at this point, at the beginning of 2024, there's a lot of opportunity, but there's a lot of challenges also with it.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned pilots and doctors. Those are, highly specialized, highly trained, very, very high level, important positions. And I think anytime you have a position like that, it's inherently going to have a greater barrier to entry than say customer service or something like that. So yeah, I totally understand the sense that, we need to have some sort of barriers. You can't just let anybody into the industry. Yeah. We need to have highly trained, highly specialized people, and it's inherently going to be tough to get to those senior ranks. I just see the situation demographically that we're kind of approaching, in that the boomers are retiring, Gen X behind them, and I just don't see there being enough people moving into those senior individual contributor level roles, because we're not getting enough people into the top of the funnel right now to eventually, fill those senior level roles. So I suppose that's how I see the problem. and I think everybody really wants to hire the senior folks. That seems to be the sense that, hey, we have these gaps on our team. These are the skills that we know that we need that our current existing staff don't have. But what do you do when you don't have budget and you don't have headcount, as we're seeing in this economy, whatever it is that I've seen over the last year? Any tips on how to do kind of more with less when it comes to budget and staff and, refining your security practice without all the resources in the world?
Yet another challenge. If someone's a chief security officer and they don't have staff, they don't have budget. Gene Spafford from Purdue University, years ago said, if you find yourself in that role, you don't have staff, you don't have budget, your role in the organization is take the blame when things go wrong. But companies, need to understand that security is an investment. And it's we're even seeing now with SEC disclosures now they're putting a lot with the new SEC rules. Disclosure is something companies have to put in their financial statements. So I remember the AAA used to belong to their envelope when you pay your bill. It said it doesn't cost to be a AAA member; it pays. It's a cute thing to say, but so too with security. It doesn't cost to invest in information security; it pays. The city of Baltimore a few years ago had a ransomware outbreak for a lot of different reasons. They didn't invest appropriately. They spent millions of dollars to get back to square one. Had they been proactive and spent half of that, they could have been, much farther ahead. So if management is not willing to invest in security, then, there's a management issue there. But once again, that is a quandary a lot of companies faces. You're tasked to do X with a staff of 3 when you really need a staff of 9. What I found is, a lot of security people are team players. From the get-go, you have to be a team player to be in security because you're working with a lot of different people, different divisions. That's one of the neat things also. It's not, you're not just stuck in IT. You're dealing with HR. You're dealing with legal. You're dealing with, overall IT. And so people are the team players and they're working to do more. But if a manager finds themselves in that position, you need to ensure they don't burn themselves out because people are willing to give 110%. They could only do that for so long. And if a company doesn't have adequate staff in the long term, they're just going to burn their people out and they will go elsewhere. So it's a much bigger problem than just security. But if the CSO finds themselves in that, there are training options you could give people. You could give them, one of the good things of not having adequate staff is you give people a lot more responsibility than they may normally get in a fully staffed situation. So you could sort of turn that lemon into some interesting security lemonade.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's almost a point about framing with your staff, saying, look, I know this seems like a lot of work right now. But if you look at it on the bright side, this is very much a resume building opportunity for you. I'm here to help you however I can grow, your career into the next thing. I have a lot of discussions these days about that whole problem with, belts are tightening across the board. Security is seen as a cost center, and we're just not able to get any budget or any headcount when things are lean. And I'm having a hard time convincing the board or the C-suite, whomever, that security is an investment we need to make right now and into the future. Any thoughts on how you can build a business case for that budget, for that headcount, and maybe what you do if you're, despite your best efforts and strategy, not able to get that?
One aspect of, security built into IT is risk management. And there's a fantastic framework called FAIR, Factor Analysis of Information Risk. And, one mistake, IT people make is that, we like technology, a lot of people like gadgets and toys. And then when they meet with management and the board, they will mistakenly think, they have that, same excitement. And a common mistake IT managers, CSOs make is when they speak to the board, they speak to them in InfoSec language, not what they want to hear. So FAIR is a taxonomy which you are able to give quantitative and qualitative information to the board in a manner which they could understand. So you share with them, the risks of inadequate security budgets. Let them know if we are not adequately secured, here's this regulatory risk. Here's this, risk to our PR. Here's the risk to our customers, which would incur these legal costs, these regulatory costs, etc. Don't go back to them and say, hey, we should spend 20% more on a checkpoint firewall because, for these reasons. Once again, if you speak to them in the language they understand and in the language of business, it is quite a compelling communication method to give to them, and you're speaking to the language they could understand. It at that point, you've done all you can because really it's a board decision, it's a management decision. You report and they decide, and hopefully they'll make a prudent business decision. As I said, FAIR is a great way to do that because you're speaking to them in the language which they understand. About dollars and cents, business decisions, risk, etc. It's eminently clear. It's factual. You give it to them, and at that point, if they don't want to back you on that, it really is a much bigger business decision and a much more an overall, business problem for that specific organization.
How do you decide when the battle, I guess, for budget or headcount or assessing these risks? How do you decide when it's appropriate to keep on trying or to cut your losses and move on to the next company that's more open-minded when it comes to security?
That's, it's a very, individual decision. Meaning if a person's developing ulcers, if you can't sleep at night, over the long term, then they really need to, if their work-life balance is really suffering in the long term. That's one thing about security also. It's not a 9 to 5. There's weekends, there's overtime. And, everyone is willing to, put in, go the extra mile. But if it turns into sort of like an office space type of environment, which is dysfunctional, then a person really needs to, to think of other opportunities. And one thing they have to look out for themselves. And I said is, that's one aspect of, security also is you have to have, thick skin. Often it's about telling people no, they can't, getting in the way of very excited, marketing people and business people who don't understand that doing something is may sound great is, far too much of a security risk. So you have to have the ability to have, people scream at you and deal with that. Hopefully, that doesn't happen that often, but that is one of the aspects of information security is, you have to understand that. But, to your point is, if a person is having stomach pains day after day, week after week, they come home and, they're yelling at their kids day after day, their wife is angry at them day after day, etc. That is a bigger problem. Look elsewhere. That is, all of us could deal with a few hiccups here and there. You have to because that's the nature of the beast. But as I said, long term, if it goes on and it's not getting any better, you're not supported by management. Management is not transparent. Then it's better for you, to definitely, start putting feelers out there.
Yeah, and I forget what podcast I listened to brought this up, but there's apparently a difference between long-term stress and acute stress or short-term stress. So I think it would be helpful to analyze, if you're in that situation, analyze if this problem is going to persist in the next 6 months, or if this is something that might resolve itself in the next, couple of weeks, for instance, or even in the next week. That might be a good way to frame it and figure out if it's truly a long-term, omnipresent problem, or if it's something that you think might be able to be resolved. What about?
That was one thing also I found, like being in consulting. you know right away the nature of a company. If it's dysfunctional, if it's a people company, if it's, office space, because, if you're on security projects, you're meeting a lot of people. If you're on an audit, you're meeting with a lot of people. It becomes, quite clear if there's politics, if there's backstabbing, etc. And that's why many consultants will be at a client and then decide to work there because they're saying, hey, this is a nice place to work at. But I said is, for some people, during the interview process, everyone's nice and cheery. When they get there, it's sort of like a cruise. Everything looks fun and grand, but the picture of, the pool, you don't realize, there's 800 people there, vying for that same, 200 square foot pool.
Absolutely. How have you found, I guess, hiring or, management, that sort of thing within consulting versus the industry side? Have you noticed a difference there? One
thing, they're very different, domains. And so too with, even within consulting companies, some, see their consultants as a body, which to bill as, maximum they can, get the, squeeze the most out of them. Other, see the consultant as their most prized possession, and they treat them, quite well. And it's quite, easy, you speak to people, current employees, ex-employees, and it's not that difficult to get a feel for those type of organizations. A lot of, management consulting firms are known to, work the people, 80 hours a week long term. The people going into that, at the beginning, they understand, this is a stepping stone to bigger and better things. They want to spend 2 years at a top tier consulting firm to get on their resume, get the experience. And they'll use that and they'll deal with those, 60, 80 hour weeks. A lot of time, is when you're at a, consulting firm also is, you have to work with the folks in sales to know, if this engagement takes 4 weeks, don't sell it for 2 weeks, because at the end of the day, the salesperson is the one who gets, the bonus and the commission. It's the consultant who has to, do the work. And they're the ones who are put on a 4-week project and find they have, 2 weeks to do that because on week 3, they're at the next client. I said, that happens. Projects will be, scoped incorrectly. Those things happen. But once again, if it happens project after project, then there is a bigger problem there. I said, everyone is, you got to be a team player in this industry, and, people will understand that. But as I said, if it happens, time and time again, then, it's not a one-off, it's a systemic issue. And hopefully, there's a lot of great consulting companies out there to work for. And hopefully, if a person wants to go, down that career path, they'll find themselves there.
Yeah, I certainly see basically 2 different types of consulting firms. There's the ones that compete on price, and then there's the ones that compete on quality. And usually you don't see, never the twain shall meet, so to speak. In my experience, I got my start in the industry at a consulting firm. I've seen what can happen when you're booking projects too quickly and consultants have too many projects on their calendar at all times. They burn out, they move on. Maybe they're paid very well, but it's only sustainable for so long. And anytime you have massive amounts of activity, I think quality inherently is going to suffer. What I've seen happening in the consulting industry ever since I've been adjacent to it or within it is kind of a race to the bottom in rates. There's a lot of price pressure on these consulting firms to compete on price. And now with the introduction of the automation platforms in the GRC space, it's getting even worse to the point where these audits are being done so quickly. There's no possible way that you could be thorough and truly do everything you should be doing. But at the end of the day, it's like you said earlier, more of a checkbox exercise. Obviously, you've been on both sides of the fence. This may be a little bit off topic, but I'm curious of the consulting firms that you've either worked for or worked with as a client. How do you identify as an auditor or consulting firm that you're working with, how do you identify a good one that is going to do a quality job for you versus churning and burning, their consultants?
Yeah, I mean, you want to, speak to people, don't ask them for references because, try to, reach out to your network of people, who've used them. And it's, the information security space is rather small. So you're not that far from, you put out on, LinkedIn or ask your friends, you may, necessarily want to do it, publicly on LinkedIn, but, send an email to, 10 people, have you used, this firm X? And odds are they'll know about it, or they'll know someone who does. So you do that way. You have to understand also is every, Michael Jordan, the GOAT, he missed a lot of shots. So, there will be consulting firms who, you get a consultant who doesn't do a job. So understand that also. On the other side, someone who badmouths a consulting firm, that you have to see, is that a one-off? Every consultant, is going to have bad projects. And there's a lot of reasons why a project may go south, not necessarily the consultant's fault, not necessarily the consulting firm's fault. But with that, as price is important. But as I said, is, using, Boeing as an example, it seems like, one of the reasons, their quality has suffered, over the last years is they went from an engineering company, to a Wall Street darling. 40 years ago, every aerospace engineer's dream was to work for Boeing. And price is important. I mean, we do have price constraints. That's why if you're putting out an RFP, get a number of different vendors out there. If you go to the big four firms, you're paying for the name there. You could always find cheap firms, but in the long term, it can be quite expensive. PCI DSS compliance. Getting a good, QSA to do the job, pays for itself because there's the audit itself. But many times, the auditor could give you deep, broad advice on how to do things better. And if they do the audit incorrectly, then you're at significant risk because, they blew the audit. You, in truth, are non-compliant now. You have to get another firm to fix that. You may, have issues with your acquiring bank, which your processing fees are going up. So you may have saved $25,000 on that audit, but by using that firm, it could have cost you, $250,000. And there's a lot of stories like that. So, price is important, but quality is even more important. And so you have to, like everything else, there is that balance there. The good news is there's no shortage of really good consulting firms out there, really good, smart people. I'm fortunate to have worked with a lot of them. But I said you've always got that yin and the yang of quality, versus cost, and if and you have to identify what is the risk of going with the lowball firm. If it's just some coding changes on a non-critical application, so use an offshore programmer and save some dollars. But if this is going to be a mission critical system, which could impact the overall bottom line, saving money is far too risky. And getting back to FAIR, once again, you take all of this information and you make a quantified decision about that. And once again, is what they say. Parachutes and mountain climbing equipment, don't go cheap on that. But other times, if you can go cheap, go for it. You don't want to throw money away. But when it comes to certain IT projects, going cheap in the long run is the most expensive way to go about things.
For sure, yeah. I'm reminded of a saying my dad always told me: "Measure twice, cut once."
Sure.
And you could apply that to selecting a vendor, to hiring staff, doing everything right the first time versus having to go back in and fix it after the fact. Usually a best practice. What about on the hiring side? Are there any particular, I guess, challenges that you've encountered over the years between your years in industry and consulting?
I mean, at the end, always. There's a lot of, everyone, approaches, a candidate differently. And so if you've got, I've always had, rarely, like, let's say, they'll meet 10 people through the course of the interviews. Rarely is, is it like a vote of, say, 10-0. But, like anything else, certain job roles are quite critical. Chief technology officer, any CXO, the repercussions of a bad hiring decision is significant. But on the other side, even a junior security person, if they're not qualified and you hire them, the repercussions could be significant. If they make a mistake. Snowden, for example, was somewhat of a junior sysadmin. The damage he caused to the U.S. is measured in billions of dollars and lives lost. But yeah, HR has its own set of challenges in information security. A lot of HR departments don't know how to hire for information security roles. In a lot of organizations, you'll have what's called an HR generalist, and they're tasked to hire a lot of different people. That's not their fault. That's their role. So how to hire a information security professional? Often they'll think of certifications. So they'll ask for are you CISSP certified? Thinking that's the end all for security qualification. And just because someone's CISSP doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be a great hire or not a great hire. But with it, yeah, I mean, as I said, there's HR has its own problems, its own quirks within information security. That needs to be fixed also within this overall, talent shortage issue.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common challenge for hiring managers out there. Maybe they're working in a larger corporation. That HR generalist or recruiter, as you'd mentioned, they got to fill everything from the accounting assistant to the CISO in terms of jobs, and it's almost impossible for them to develop a specialty in each of those different functional areas. And often, I think you get frustration from the hiring manager. Like, look, despite how much I'm working with this person, I just cannot get them to understand what it is that we do and what we're looking for. Mm-hmm. And then often you'll get the tension between the hiring team and HR when it comes to assembling the job description, and ends up being too complicated or has too many things on there, or you have the CISSP for the junior level role, that sort of thing. Any best practices in working with HR and recruiters to help them understand what it is that you do and what you're looking for in folks?
Yeah, I mean, it's important, security is, should we say, a bit of a niche, within IT. And if you're looking to hire a security person, try to find a recruitment firm that understands, information security. How do you find one? Speak to me. Speak to your colleagues. Ask around. Where did you find that firewall admin? Because they know how to hire. They know how to qualify candidates. And when that firm sends you 5 resumes, those are 5 quality resumes, as opposed to, if they don't know how to hire, what separates a good pro from, someone who doesn't, know anything. You'll get, 5 lousy resumes. You're wasting your time. You've interviewed these 5 people, of which none of them are even in the ballpark. So it's like anything else. It's finding a good partner who you can work with. I said, so much of HR is, outsourced now. So companies need to find a good recruitment firm. And once again, these are not going to be the cheapest firms out there. I said these are, since they are specialty providers, you're going to have to pay more for them. But, you need to take a long-term approach, one bad just hiring a bad person, it will cost you in terms of time, effort. The other employees, who've been sidelined, due to that bad hire, and so sometimes trying to save a few dollars in the long run could be extremely expensive. And so, yeah, it's like anything else. Be pragmatic, and find a good firm, and any organization that has a good recruitment firm they work with that they could trust, who understands them also. They're a very valuable asset because they know the pipeline and they know what you need, and that's a win-win situation. It's worth paying. It's worth paying a premium for.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean that there's a reason I have the job that I do. It's because I understand my niche and know what those hiring managers are looking for. And if an organization is struggling with a job description, I can say, well, look, this particular thing does not make sense. You don't want an OSCP in your job description for a SOC analyst role, which is surprisingly common. I'm not sure how that happens. But yeah, and then too, upside of working with a recruiting firm is you also get that guarantee. So if that person doesn't work out in the first 90 days or whatever the guarantee period is, then you have some solace, I guess, in being able to replace that person. And you almost have kind of a 90-day trial period for that person, which a lot of companies have anyway. But to have that in writing and have that contractual obligation to get a replacement or refund, depending on the firm, that's certainly valuable as well. What about on the internal side? Because I know a lot of hiring managers out there, especially for the last year, I've heard are struggling with budget, and maybe they can't work with an external firm. And maybe you have a recruiter that you generally work with that is relatively talented or kind of cares about what they do, but maybe they're not a security specialist. Is there anything you can do as a hiring manager to educate that internal recruiter to understand, what it is that you need on your team?
Yeah, I guess, if they don't have that expertise, you need to, work with them. It's going to, take time on your part, because once again, if they don't, if they don't know what to look for, then, they're sort of clueless. I mean, if someone, there's thousands of different, breeds of dogs, but if a person doesn't know, all these dogs look, relatively the same. So too with cars, they all look roughly the same. So you need to work with them and you let them know, hey, here's the, must-have items. Here's the requirements. Here's the nice to have. Here's the, that cherry on top. But once again, if they don't have that expertise, they have a gap. So how's that gap going to be filled? You have to work with them. Go through if they don't know how to identify a good candidate, then it sort of falls in your lap. Once again, having a realistic set of requirements of what's needed for the job. One mistake is sometimes they want someone who's a jack of all trades and master of them also, and no such person exists. So even though there might not be such a talent gap, you need to be realistic about what the talent pool is out there.
Yeah, I think one best practice I was just thinking of, if you have an internal recruiter and you want to educate them, a great way to do that would be to say, look, describe in your own words what this person is, what background they have, what job titles they may have had previously. If there's any way you can sit down with the recruiter and analyze either resumes of people that have applied to your job, if they're posting it somewhere, which I don't think that's the best way to find security people. I think it's going out to the market and finding them. But if they're just relying on inbound resumes, look through some resumes with that recruiter and say, hey, here's what I like about this guy or gal. Here's what I don't like, and why. The why is really important.
Sure.
Thinking through these decisions that you're making and saying it out loud with the recruiter, that's really going to help them hone who they're targeting. And even better, if you're able to find somebody, especially if you're going on LinkedIn and maybe somebody, that they wouldn't take the job with your team because they're happy where they're at, but they would be a perfect fit for it. look up their LinkedIn profile, share it with the recruiter, say, I think this person would be ideal and here's why. And just spend a little bit of time on the front end. Like you mentioned, be proactive, and then you're going to save so much time on the back end in the long run, and not spending hour after hour interviewing people. And then, say you interviewed 5 people, that's 5 hours out of your week. When if you had spent maybe an hour up front, a couple hours even, you would have saved that time on the back end. So yeah, that's great. Well, we're coming up on time, Ben. I want to be respectful of your time. Just one last question for you. Is there anything that we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
I think, one of the, issues in general is, salary is always the most difficult aspect. And, that's a challenge also. You could all, lowballing, trying to, get a candidate, for less, than they really do is another, again, a short-term solution, because if they're unhappy with their compensation, they're going to be a poor employee. So I think companies need to, level set, current market rates, certain, especially when the supply and demand is could be a bit out of whack. They need to really take the time to understand, what should we be paying a good candidate, and that varies, significantly. Meaning even, New York City, financial services firms are going to pay a whole lot more than, say, a nonprofit hospital. On the other side, if you're working, at a financial services firm, you may be doing, 60 hours a week, week after week. If you're working for a city agency, you're there at 9 o'clock, and at 5:01, you're on your way to the subway. So one, they're going to be paid a lot more, one, they're going to be paid a lot less. So really, that level set about what to compensate, I think, can go a long way.
Yeah, and it's so hard to get good salary data these days, especially with how quickly the market moves. Like a year ago, GRC people were insanely highly in demand, especially in the consulting world. And nowadays, it seems like GRC hiring is all but fallen off a cliff, at least in consulting. So, obviously, supply and demand, the salaries are going to dip a little bit. And you're not going to find that information on salary.com, unfortunately, or really anywhere online to get true, accurate live salary data. That's where, again, specialist recruiters in your niche can help. Even if it's not me, somebody else in the niche, we'll all be able to at least give you some sort of ballpark on what a reasonable salary looks like. And like you mentioned, that's such an important point when it comes to retention. Even somebody who's not motivated strictly by money, they're still more likely to stick around if they feel valued monetarily and otherwise. So yeah, that's a great point. Great place to end. I appreciate your time, Ben. If people want to find you online or keep up to date with what you're doing, what's the best way to do so?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn. There's only one Ben Rothke. It's not like Steve Johnson. So yeah, reach out to me, connect, and more than happy to work with you.
Excellent. And you've also written a few articles on this topic, the talent gap in security and the number of unfilled jobs. So I'll be sure to list those in the show summary as well for our listener and watchers. So thanks for your time, Ben, and thanks, everybody. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.